Good morning, and thank you for joining the Fraud, Waste, and Abuse webinar series. I'm Scott Ward, a marketing program specialist at Esri, and I'm joined today by my colleague Patrick O'Brien, solution engineer for national government. This will be the first webinar of 2018 in a series of webinars covering workflow-specific examples of how GIS can combat fraud, waste, and abuse. While our previous webinars have focused on how our technology platform WebGIS, Desktop GIS, and insights for ArcGIS can be used to detect and prevent fraud, waste, and abuse, in today's webinar, Patrick will provide an overview of how that technology can be used in specific workflows. We will explore using GIS to identify travel card fraud, display tip line and active investigations in dashboards, recognize and monitor contract fraud, and combat the opioid epidemic by finding fraudulent physicians and pharmacies. We will leave some time at the end for questions and answers. With that, I'm now going to turn it over to Patrick for today's presentation.
Thank you, Scott, and thank you everybody for joining. As Scott mentioned, our previous webinars have really focused on how our technology platform can be used to detect and prevent fraud, waste, and abuse. As Scott mentioned, more specifically, WebGIS for initial operating capability, Desktop GIS for complex spatial analysis and modeling, and Insights for ArcGIS for deep data learning and discovery. Those webinars have been recorded and are available to you at any time for your viewing pleasure. But in this series of webinars for 2018, we wanted to provide an overview of how ArcGIS can be used in specific workflows that we find across all fraud, waste, and abuse organizations. This webinar today will briefly discuss at a high level how the ArcGIS platform can assist in combating these types of fraud. The webinars to follow will take a deeper dive into these subjects. The first three that we're going to cover: identifying travel card fraud, displaying tip line and active investigations in dashboards, and recognizing and monitoring contract fraud, we have found as completely cross-cutting workflows among OIG agencies, as well as at the federal, state, and local levels. The final topic, combating opioid fraud by finding fraudulent physicians and pharmacies, has been one of the most imperative missions recently in response to the opioid epidemic plaguing our communities. So, as an overview, as Scott mentioned, I work on the national government team, specifically with federal OIGs, and we support multiple federal OIGs across the federal government. The OIG has been using Esri technology for about 10 years now. Our work supporting fraud, waste, and abuse began with the Recovery, Accountability, and Transparency Board, which was tasked with preventing fraud and providing transparency in the $1 trillion stimulus package under President Barack Obama. Since then, we have seen a number of OIGs at the federal and state level of government begin using geospatial technology to investigate and prevent fraud, waste, and abuse. A few of these examples are here today. However, some workflows we find with working with these specific agencies that each of them has specific workflows. Fraud looks very different from one agency to the other, just because of the programs and the specialties that they're investigating within that agency. But other workflows, like the ones that we're going to cover today, are identical across OIGs. The first demonstration that we're going to cover is identifying travel card fraud. We need to find the outliers and why this money is being spent in a fraudulent manner. Using GIS technology, we can really take a deep dive into the location of the spending of travel card frauds to identify fraud. So an example of this is USPS uses the fuel card transactions of their long haul truckers. So they know the location of a purchase of fuel, as well as the known route that was or should be taken by the long haul truckers. So anytime that a transaction happens far away from the optimized driving route, we can identify that as potential fraud. That is just a pure indicator of fraud. It does not prove fraud was a factor. So employee fuel card abuse costs private and public sectors millions of dollars annually. And investigators can use GIS to look at these clues to determine whether a purchase was legitimate. So we have taken this type of analysis and put it into a very easy to understand story map. So we have created a story map indicating how a very simple gas card fraud analysis may occur. So what we do is first we get a spreadsheet of all of the transactions. Using the address of the transactions, we geocode those locations so we can place the plots on the or plot the points on the map. Now these transactions that we're looking at here are for a trucking route that is going from Tampa Bay to Tallahassee, Florida. Knowing the area, we buffer this by 10 miles, figuring any stop within that 10-mile buffer is a reasonable place for a long-haul trucker to stop for gas along the route, or maybe at a rest stop. But that leads us to see these transactions that happen far outside of this buffer. Now, these transactions here could potentially identify fraud. Using smart mapping, we can then prioritize our investigation. So smart mapping allows us to look at 2 or more attributes at the same time. So what we're looking at here is the color of the dots indicates the number of transactions occurring at each of these gas stations, where the size of the dot indicates the average transaction amount. That immediately leads me down here to Kissimmee, Florida, to try to understand what's happening down here, where at this specific gas station, there have been a total of 12 transactions with an average transaction amount of $788. That is a major outlier for me, and that would lead me to prioritize this investigating for potential travel card fraud. Now, this is just one demonstration example that we have put together, but this same analysis has been used across the federal government in many agencies. So using your own data, geocoding the location of these transactions to view the spatial manner in which the transactions are occurring may lead you to find potential fraud. Our second demonstration that we want to cover is the ability to display tip lines and active investigations and dashboards. So we have come across this in many organizations. Dashboarding is a very common technique, and using Operations Dashboard for ArcGIS allows you to provide a very simple way to get an operational dashboard to monitor situational awareness across your operations. We can look at active investigations, like we can see in the dashboard on the right, being able to see how many investigations are currently open, how many investigations are in review, and how many confirmed fraud cases are available. This allows leadership to have a 2-minute view into the status of operations, giving the ability to take a brief view of this dashboard to understand exactly what is happening in our investigations. Also, similarly, we can display tip lines. Now, we see tip lines at the federal, state, and local levels, allowing constituents to report in on possible bad behaviors with federal programs. We can also connect directly to the tip line data to allow that data to be displayed in a dashboard. That gives us a real live, up-to-the-minute view into the status of our operations. So now we're going to quickly view a live dashboard. So here we have our investigators reports dashboard. This dashboard is connected to a live data set, so our investigators in the field can relay information back to a headquarters level. You can see on the left side of the screen, we have our open investigations. So we have a list of the largest open amounts of our investigations of potential fraud, and also the most recent updates to our investigations. So currently we have 216 open investigations. Now, in many OIG spaces, we see that there is too much work to be done with too few people. Now, that's why this data looks the way it does, just because there's only so many investigators that can go out into the field and conduct these investigations. So currently, 80% of our investigations are open. Only 7.5 are in review, and 6.3 in 2018 have been closed. So on the right side of the screen, we can see the investigations that are currently under review, as well as the number of confirmed fraud cases. Now these maps and applications, this dashboard allows you to take a quick view at the status of your operations to gain understanding of how your organization is doing in investigations. But it also allows investigators and analysts to take a deeper dive into this information. We can click on the largest open amounts, and it will highlight and zoom to our largest open amount, which is at Coastal Cove Tackle, which is a transaction amount of $14,790. Now, as an investigator, that's something that I might want to pick up, so I'm going to investigate this. Now, what you can't see is while I'm talking to you, I have my collector for ArcGIS application open on my personal device. So an investigator can go into the field using our mobile applications and relay information back to the headquarters level. So the investigator in the field can use a tablet or a smartphone and change information, write down a description of what they see, take pictures, and automatically send that update to this dashboard. So as you can see, this is a live look into our investigations. I currently changed that location to in review. So that changed our open investigations from 216 to 215. And also now we have 20 investigations in review where we previously had 19. And you can see the color of the dot has changed from an open investigation orange to an investigation in review in blue. Now, when you're connected to live data, that gives these dashboards way more power than a static look in which you would have in a printed report. These dashboards, you can create as many as you want. You can have dashboards for each region within your organization, all the way and aggregated to a nationwide view if you're working in the federal government. So that is an easy way and a very brief look at how investigator dashboards and tip line dashboards can help your organization in monitoring the status of your operations. The third demonstration that we want to view is being able to recognize and monitor contract fraud. Now, all federal, state, and local agencies produce grants and hold contracts for services. So using GIS and location-based technology, we can monitor the flow of money from its source to its consumer. So this allows us to ensure transparency that the money is being well spent and going to consumers in a legal fashion without neglect. We have seen many cases of monitoring contracts as well as the dispersion of money where government organizations want to provide transparency. So they want to be able to tell citizens that their tax dollars are being spent in a applicable manner. So we can have transparency from the spending of money, as well as create applications that will allow us to identify potential contract fraud. So we can go ahead and take a look at a couple of these examples right now. The state of Iowa has used ArcGIS to produce a couple of outward-facing, public-facing applications. So I know that we are in July, but this is a winter application that allows Iowa citizens to see where state highway plows have been and how much money has been spent on each road segment. So as you can see here, we have a live look into the vehicles of Iowa Department of Transportation. These are real-time locations of the vehicles traveling on roads. And we can also have pop-ups showcasing an image that was captured from the front of these vehicles. What they do is they aggregate per road segment how much money is being spent. So if I click on a specific road segment here, I can see when the last time a vehicle passed on the segment, how long they were there, and if they applied any material. So if we can imagine Iowa in winter, they would be applying certain materials along the road to maintain safety for Iowa drivers. If they were spreading any type of material, that information would be available here in the pop-up. So how much salt has been spread along this road? How much is that costing the taxpayer? This is a very, very useful application. It's a public-facing application that allows citizens to see how their tax dollars are being spent through Iowa Department of Transportation. We can also provide transparency by creating simple mapping applications. So here what we're looking at is we're looking at another story map, a story map series of the 2017 federal funds per state. So this is all of the money that the federal government is spending per state. The pop-up allows us to see how much money in total is being spent, as well as the breakdown of the federal agency awarding these dollar amounts. We have a breakdown of each agency by state in this story map. So it allows us to see where these specific agencies are spending money. Now, when it comes to contract fraud might be a little bit harder to map. So what we looked at previously was simple transparency, being able to show citizens and constituents how that money is being spent. But what we want to do is we want to create applications that will look internally to see if that money is being spent in a fraudulent manner. This application is a demonstration application mirrored after a United States Postal Service application called the Contract Fraud Double Dip Project. Contract Fraud Double Dip is when a USPS contract is awarded in a fraudulent manner to a USPS neighbor, spouse, family member, or others. So what USPS has done is the USPS has geocoded the location of the home addresses of all their employees. Now, using a simple distance filter, we would be able to find where a contract was awarded within a certain distance of those USPS employees. So here I can change these parameters to look at an area in which I want. So I will look at a distance of 100 feet where the contract award was greater than $10,000 to a zip code beginning with 200, which will be the DC area. When I click apply, this mapping application will pull out all of the locations of DC USPS contracts that were awarded to a person or a company that lives within 100 feet of a USPS employee. I can then go down the list to see the locations of these contracts, who it was awarded to, and who the USPS employee who lives nearby is, to see if I can identify potential fraud. Now, using this type of application, this is using Web App Builder for ArcGIS. It allows you to create your own web applications and web tools, and allows the user to maneuver the parameters in ways that would benefit them. Specifically, looking at certain dollar amounts being spent, as well as looking at certain areas of the country or the state. The final demonstration that we wanted to cover in this webinar series is combating opioid fraud. As we all know, the opioid epidemic is plaguing communities across the United States. It is a detriment to our young kids, and it is becoming a increasing problem in the safety and health of U.S. citizens. So what we're doing is we're using ArcGIS to help identify high concentrations of potential opioid diversion. And we're harnessing the power of data and analytics to map trends, identify areas of risk, and detect fraud schemes. Now, fraud schemes within the opioid epidemic are sometimes very complex, but using location, we can find the outliers to see how far are people traveling to visit a certain physician for an opioid prescription, as well as how far are people traveling to fill an opioid prescription at a pharmacy, and how many pharmacies did they pass. So here we can take a deeper dive into this, into combating the opioid epidemic. So first, what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at an Insights page. So Insights is a web application that allows for deep data discovery and analysis, providing you the ability to have maps, mapping analysis, as well as charts and tables in the same workspace. What we're looking at here is we're looking at a workbook that I've created, looking at opioid deaths per state due to overdose, as well as the death rate per 100,000 citizens. Just by the simple eye test, we can see that the Mid-Atlantic region is really getting hit hard in the opioid epidemic, with very high death rates in the states of Ohio, West Virginia, and Pennsylvania. But let's take a deeper dive into this information. If I look at the opioid deaths per state, I can see that Florida has the highest number of opioid deaths per state in 2017, with a total of 4,728 deaths. And we can see that these charts are all linked together. So when I click on Florida in the opioid deaths chart, I can see that it highlights it on the map, as well as picks the state of Florida in the opioid death rate chart. So we can see that the opioid death rate chart for the state of Florida is about the national average. The second highest number of deaths per state is the state of California, which is well below the national average for the opioid death rate per 100,000 citizens. The next state is the state of Pennsylvania. It has the third highest number of deaths, as well as the fifth highest opioid death rate of any state in the United States. So I can take a deeper dive into the state of Pennsylvania. So using data that's published by CMS, the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, I have mapped the location of all providers in the state of Pennsylvania. So this is the location of about 33,000 physicians across the state. This type of data allows me to see information such as the specialty of the physician, the total claims that were opioids, as well as the opioid prescribing rate. So here I have a breakdown of the specialty of the specialty of these physicians and the opioid prescribing rate. Now, when I look at some of these, I can see emergency medicine, orthopedic surgery, internal medicine. Some of these specialties would rank really high in the number of prescriptions of opioids. But one thing that stands out to me is family practice. I wouldn't assume that a family practice physician would write that many opioid prescriptions. So when I click on the family practice in the tree chart, the family practice specialty in the tree chart, I can see once again that all of my links change. Looking at the table, I can sort by the number of opioid claims. So here what we can see is this physician with NPI number beginning with 104 had a total number of claims of 24,118 in the year 2017. Now the number of opioid claims is the highest among any other family practice physician in the state of Pennsylvania, with almost 5,000, giving an opioid prescribing rate of 20%. Now this physician, on December 20th, 2017, was indicted by a federal grand jury in a 19-count indictment charging the unlawful distribution and dispensing of controlled substances, causing the death of 5 patients by the unlawful distribution and dispensing of controlled substances, and maintaining 2 drug-involved premises in Mount Carmel and Shamokin, Pennsylvania. So using basic analysis, we have been able to dwindle down the haystack to find that needle, from looking at a national view, then to looking at a state view to pull out the outlier. Another type of analysis that we might want to see is how far are people traveling to fill their opioid prescriptions? And we have created a story map that explains how we can find these types of outliers. So here I'm going to look at a theoretical example of a physician in Western New York. Now, using GIS, I'm sure we can all understand that we can understand networks and geographic distribution. So here what I'm looking at is I'm looking at this physician and all of the opioid prescriptions that he or she has written. We can run some very basic spatial analysis, such as average travel time, to see how far are people traveling to visit this physician for an opioid prescription. That would then allow us to understand outliers. But one thing that Health and Human Services wants to ask is how far are people traveling for this one to fill their opioid prescriptions at pharmacies. So instead of looking at fraudulent physicians, we want to look at fraudulent pharmacies. We also want to know how many other pharmacies are closer to these beneficiaries. That would then lead us to understand how many pharmacies did someone likely pass on their way to fill their opioid prescriptions. So of this physician, we can then look at the pharmacies where his or her opioid prescriptions were filled and look at that geographic distribution. Here we can run the same analysis of average travel time to these pharmacies, which in this example leads us to the corner drugstore. So as you can see, the geographic distribution here, it's vast, but there are certain reasons why someone might travel a long distance to visit a pharmacy. One is because the pharmacy might be near the physician. Another is someone might live very far away from their home address. But when we aggregate all of these types of, all of this data, which is massive data sets, that will kind of dwindle out these types of outliers. So what HHS-OIG specifically wants to answer is how many pharmacies did someone pass on their way to the corner drugstore? So here we can look at a single patient. So by looking at a single patient, we can start to develop an algorithm of how we would answer this question. So what we do is we create an optimized drive time from this single patient to the corner drugstore. So here, this patient drove about 52 minutes and about 36 miles away. We can then run a drive time analysis from this single patient to see what other pharmacies are close by to the patient's house. Dissolving these boundaries will allow us to select the pharmacies that are either closer to the beneficiary's house or that they likely passed on their way to the corner drugstore. So for this specific example, this beneficiary lives closer or past 7 different pharmacies on their way to the corner drugstore. Those are the specific GIS steps that will allow us to implement into a model. So once we know how to create those GIS steps, we can incorporate into a model to run the same analysis for all of the beneficiaries traveling to the corner drugstore. So here we can see that a total of 40 different pharmacies were passed on their way on these beneficiaries' ways to the corner drugstore. This will allow us to find the outliers, find the pharmacies that people are traveling long distances to, that people are passing many other pharmacies on their way to. Pharmacies are pharmacies also are potentially fraudulent, just the same as physicians. Now here I'm running this analysis in Western New York, where I did a 3-mile buffer along the optimized route, as well as a 15-minute drive time from the beneficiary's home. In different parts of the country, we can change these parameters, just like what we did for the contract fraud. So here we change these parameters when we're viewing a pharmacy in downtown Manhattan. So instead of a 3-mile buffer from the optimized route, we selected a 500 feet buffer, as well as a 5-minute walking distance instead of a 15-minute drive time from the beneficiary's house. We can then see the number of pharmacies that are being passed to each one of these pharmacies. That is how we're using GIS to answer the questions of how far are people traveling to a single pharmacy, how many other pharmacies are closer by to the beneficiaries, as well as how many did they likely pass on their way to this other pharmacy. Now, all of these examples and more are available for your viewing pleasure and allow you to share this information. So if you go to oig.maps.arcgis.com, we have created a demonstration portal with a lot of these examples. So as you can see, these are open examples, allowing you to view these types of demonstrations that we see as cross-cutting workflows across many OIG specific as well as fraud, waste, and abuse organizations. So now I'm going to pass it back to Scott, and we're going to close up this initial webinar.
Thank you, Patrick. For our viewers, you can learn more by visiting our website. It's posted here at the top of the link. And to see a recording of this webinar and our future webinars, you'll be able to visit this webinar series page. This webinar will be posted fairly soon after this webinar is given. We'd like to thank you for joining us today. Our next Fraud, Waste, and Abuse webinar will focus on travel card fraud on August 14th, 2018. The link to register for that webinar is live now on that webinar series page. So if you click there and click on the travel card fraud webinar, you'll be able to register for that. Now we have some questions. First one, Patrick, what ArcGIS applications are needed to perform these analyses? Is desktop ArcMap or ArcPro used?
Okay, good question. The examples that we hit today primarily are web-based. So what type of software is needed? That would either be ArcGIS Online or Portal for ArcGIS, which are pretty much the same thing, except Portal for ArcGIS is held behind your firewall, allowing you to use these types of analysis with private data. We use many different applications within our web interfaces, such as our application templates like Story Maps, Web App Builder, and Operations Dashboard. These same analysis can be done on your desktop applications. So using certain analytical tools, such as the routing analysis, closest facility, are available in desktop, but desktop is not specifically needed for these examples.
Okay, thank you. Have the Story Map applications been used in court hearings before?
Another good question. Story Maps we have found are a very great briefing tool, allowing you to incorporate interactive web maps, images, videos, other multimedia, and text in a narrative format to really allow you to tell a powerful story. Currently, I only know of one example of Story Maps being used in a courtroom presence in the Department of Justice. We are definitely looking for more examples and would love to help out in creation of those types of products. Yeah, great question.
Okay. Third question, can tip line data be further analyzed using spatial analysis and statistics? Has that been done before?
Oh, yeah. So other parts of the platform that we didn't get to talk about are things such as geoanalytics server. So a lot of these federal organizations have massive tip lines coming in. I mean, we're talking about thousands and thousands a day. With other types of spatial analysis, you can start to identify patterns of your tip lines, which will allow you to identify what areas of the countries are increasing. Where are your hot spots? You know, what are the patterns that you're seeing in these tip lines? One analysis that we did with CFPB, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, showed we used their tip line information and ran spatial analytics on it to see certain patterns, such as oscillating hotspots, which at certain times of the year there are tips coming in, you know, at certain areas of the country, and you know, during summer times the tips weren't coming in, but then back at winter time, they became a hotspot again. So it allowed us to understand that pattern and then allocate our resources in a smart way to try to crack down on the specific problem that was happening.
Excellent. Thank you, Patrick. That's all we have for today. Thank you for coming, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you, everybody.